I know teachers right now are into their 40s who are still paying college loans off.
The people that aren't in education complain about what we're not doing in education. You're like, all right, so the people that are doing cool stuff, you almost have borderline a moral obligation to say, all right, this is what I'm doing then.
Let me ask you a very quick question. Is it easier to get a passport than it is to substitute teach?
Yep. Like, be lazy. Well, if I'm training people to be teachers, be lazy. Yeah, shut up and let them do it.
There's two emotions that I straddle, right? Is hope and worry. So I'm worried to death about kids, but I'm super hopeful about the future.
Education wants the instant gratification. They want the weeds. They don't want the trees.
CTE is coming gangbusters for the traditional, practitioners who don't want to even entertain moving things around for the sake of efficacy.
Do we need as much time as we need to do school?
I mean, if you're asking a 14-year-old, they're going to tell you a weekend will be fine. But no, I want to challenge kids.
If you're about to listen to this podcast, buckle up.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrauser and Ali Dahl.
Welcome to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Peter Hostrauser here. I've got Ali Dahl. What's going on, Ali? Coming off a little bit of a lull. You were like a little bit ill, last time.
Well,
I had to throw that out there.
Sometimes you podcast and you realize you're like, I'm not that sick. You just do it anyway. But I think maybe the first year podcasting, you would preserve your energy or whatnot. And it's not like I felt fine speaking and engaging, but I definitely had a fever. So I was like, maybe if you can tell in this series, if there's like an episode I seem a little fever dreamish,
Right.
That would be one. But there we go.
We're not telling anybody when that was. We just want you guys to, figure that one out. So
that one out.
No, that's awesome. Well, hey, that's what we disrupt even our own podcast when we do things like that. But I'm really excited about this guest that we have on this episode in this series. It's amazing. I love this topic. We really have touched on it here and there, but we have Dr. Karen Baptiste, and she's the producer and director of the Emmy-nominated documentary Preschool to Prison, which explores how zero-tolerance discipline and carceral design in schools disproportionately push students of color and students with disabilities towards the justice system. I have seen this myself in 23 years of secondary education. Dr. K, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm alive. I woke up this morning, so there's nothing to complain about.
We just got off a kind of, before this talking about the 80s. So we're like, we're in this, we're good. But before we completely jump in and, talk about the documentary and everything, we really want to figure out who you are. How did you get to this point? Which congratulations, that is nothing to slough off. I don't know how many Emmy-nominated people I've talked to, probably none, but now I have one. Tell us a little bit about your kind of past in education and the brief. How did you get to this point?
Yeah. In brief, I ended up in education by chance. When I had a friend ask me to come work at a group home with him, they were short-staffed, and at that time, I didn't even know what a group home was. And I was like, what's a group home? And when he told me, I was like, well, why would I want to do that? And, I was working in television at the time. And he was like, I really think you would do well, and we need people. He was like, just for a temporary time. And I was like, all right, I'll come help you out. And I got there and was just sobbing, reading all of the case stories of what had happened to these girls. It was an all-girls group home. And I ended up staying longer. I became invested in these young ladies, and time went on. And I remember the supervisor one day coming to the home and telling me, he says, I really think you should go into public education. You could do the greater good there than you can here. And I was like, what? That was never a thought for me. And so I was like, all right. And so I became a paraprofessional. And then from being a paraprofessional, I had a supervisor tell me to become a special education teacher. She says, go get your license. I promise you, I'll hire you. And I was like, all right. And I did that. And then from there, just kept going up, became a coach and got my administrative license and started working as a principal coach in New York City Public Schools. I'm a product of New York City Public Schools as well. And it just kept going. Like everything I've done, people have just said, hey, you should do this now. And I just say, okay, you see that for me? And my whole life kind of just been dictated of what other people saw for me. And that's how I ended up on this journey. And so through my experience as a special education teacher, I saw the pipeline every day, but I didn't know that's what it was. I had no knowledge of education other than my own schooling experience. And so when I looked at this pattern, and how I got curious about this was that I saw a pattern of Black and brown boys being referred for special education. And most of my students did not need it. So there were students who genuinely needed the support, who needed a smaller setting, who had authentic diagnoses. And then there were others where parents were like, well, they just told me to agree with this and sign off on this. And, whereas I had kids, I'm like, you don't belong here. You just, yeah, okay, you needed extended time. So what, right? And that's how the journey began for me, because I started looking up. I was like, why is there a pattern of I think I literally probably even typed those words into a search. And when school to prison pipeline came out, I was like, school to prison pipeline. And I was mortified at what I read that, what they said the pipeline is. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's, yes, oh, I see this. Like my kids were breaking the proxy codes on YouTube, right? Like they banned us. We weren't allowed to use that then when I was teaching. And my kids were like, we know how to get around that. And I'm like, and your IEP says, what about you? This doesn't match. Right? And so that's how it happened. And I became really interested in policy after that, because everything that we do drives, is driven based on policy. And a lot of what we see happening in schools is based on policy.
Yeah.
You saw this pattern, you experienced, the educational system yourself in seemed like many different roles. You also have a very unique background perspective, because as you kind of mentioned, you did some TV. We're talking right before we got started. You have a background in journalism, which Peter loves. Yeah, like how did that all kind of come together to, make this documentary? And I would call it, it's one thing to be in the system and see a pattern. And in my mind, and this is why we think you fit so well for this series, is you kind of took it another step and you're like, well, let's really put this together and like expose it. And you took it to a whole nother level, right? And like not everyone does that. So how did it culminate into making a documentary?
Well, it's interesting because journalism is not so far off from the work that I'm doing now, right? Like when you think about education, when you think about my leadership coaching, all of those pieces still tie in, right? Journalism is it's quite defined, though, when you think about the traditional approach to journalism around investigating stories and even people. And then you have to be factual, right? And then you have to be able to use those facts to create a story that's bite-sized. What I'm doing, what I did with this film, and even what I do in my work, is quite similar, right? I'm spending time getting to know people and organizations and societal issues, and then packaging that in a way that's digestible for people to understand what those issues are and then what needs to be done about it. And through the film, I struggled with how much do I tell? That was a big piece. And the reason is because there's so much to tell. I could easily do this for probably like 10 years. And that's not an exaggeration, right? Like I can spend that much time unpacking so many layers about the pipeline and how different groups of people are pushed into that pipeline unbeknownst to them, and how educators are brought into the system to perpetuate the pipeline unbeknownst to them as well. And so this isn't about blaming and saying, oh, teachers are at fault. Could we have better training? Yes, absolutely. When I think about my path, and I went the non-traditional route, obviously having not been an educator as my first major. And I did get some great learning, but there's a lot of gaps that I had in my learning that did not prepare me. And I think there's this misconception that, oh, I'm Black, and so the students who I mainly taught were Black and brown. And so, oh, I have an edge. I'm going to go in and just be able to automatically connect with them and just know their needs, when no, I didn't. Like, no, I didn't understand all of those things. And I think if that was embedded in my programs, I would have been better equipped going in as a teacher, right? There's a reason why the rate of teachers leaving the field is so high, right? It's never, when you talk to teachers, it's not the kids. They'll tell, right? Yes, we
Right.
have kids that are not respectful. We have kids that don't follow. But what percentage is that?
Mhm.
Right? When you think about, it's never the majority of kids. And when they're leaving, they don't leave because of the children, they leave because of the system. And this is why I talk about the system. So in putting the film together, I said, okay, I can't just jump into talking about special education only, or talking about education programs only. And then the team and I decided, you know what, why don't we make this first part an overview about what the pipeline is? Because we're assuming that everybody knows. And the more we did interviews, we learned most people didn't know.
Mhm.
So that's how we ended up packaging this to that.
Man, we could go like we could do an entire series on this. I'm really interested in this with some of my own experiences. My wife and I are both educators. It's interesting. I really love it's almost like God said that we're both in journalism. Like
Yeah.
I'm a broadcast journalism major. That was my first bachelor's degree, and you look at things differently when you
Yes.
walk into education. It's such an interesting look, and then you're like, is anybody else seeing this? Like,
Mhm.
and it
Yeah.
gets kind of, but there's a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of things when we start to talk about suspensions and even arrest in early grades. What we're going younger on this podcast because a lot of stuff that Allie and I actually talk about are how do we find our students or meet our students where they are in secondary. But we have to unpack this and go backwards and start to unpack these things. So I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think is the most misunderstood data point about maybe those suspensions and arrests and early grades because people don't know.
This is so easy. The most misunderstood data point is that these behaviors are happening, and schools are off the hook because of parents. That is the most misunderstood piece of data. And everywhere I go, I do a survey with the audience and I have them rank what are the top influences on student achievement. And I give them a multiple choice. And, I group them the multiple choice. And 100% of the time, not 99, not 100% of the time, the audience gets it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And these are educators. Right? And they always pick parental involvement as being the number one influence on student achievement. And then I break their hearts and I explain to them, I'm sorry, but no, the top influences on student achievement, study after study shows teacher collective efficacy, teacher estimates of achievement, and teacher credibility. Those are the top 3 influences on student achievement year after year. These studies have been done for decades and still yields the same results. Yeah. Parental involvement does have a positive influence, but it's nowhere near the influence that teacher collective efficacy, teacher estimates of achievement, and teacher credibility has on a student's success. So when they say, oh, well, if the parent was involved, none of this would happen. I'm like, well, you don't know that. You would actually have to do real research, right? And then you have to get tactical because people make these, and I get how you would come to that, right? I get that. And I'm not saying that parents should not be involved. Absolutely. But what these studies found, and there was a study that came out this year, if you haven't looked at it, please do. But there was a study that came out this year that also looked at parental involvement, and it looked at the state of disengagement with teens. And in that study, what they found was that parental involvement had a decrease on student engagement. You heard that right? A decrease on student engagement, right, depending upon how the parent got involved. That was by Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop, the disengaged teen. And then you can also find it, the Brookings Institute and Transcend also has that report published. And what they found in schools in that study was that 85% of middle school assignments barely ask students to recall information or apply basic skills. Yeah, right. And so when we start talking about the role of the parent, and people have asked me, why didn't you talk about parents in this documentary? And, this is missing that mark. And I'm saying, no, it's not. That could be a whole separate documentary. And you missed the main idea of this piece. The main idea was to just give you an overview of what the pipeline is. It wasn't to go in deep with each of these factors or variables about the pipeline. And then I say to them, I don't focus on parents, and I do support parents. But the reason I didn't spend so much time focused on parents, I said, because you can't control people's homes.
Yes.
And people exhaust themselves trying to control
what they can.
And then I have to ask folks, like, how many of you in here are parents, right? And then they'll raise their hand. I said, tell me, who do you want controlling your home? Right? Like, so why do you think, I don't care how that child shows up to school, why do you think their parent would want that? Right? And it's not so what ends up happening in education is a lot of the things that burn us out can be controlled. We have control over a lot of the things, and we don't pick the right work to focus on. And so as long as you keep picking the wrong thing, you're not going to yield the results that you want. So it doesn't mean you're not working hard.
Right.
You're just not picking the right work to focus on.
So
right there, Allie, right there.
I know. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So you have your company, Pioneering Possibilities.
Yeah.
And it kind of came out of a lot of this work. And one of the things that you've written about, and I think it kind of goes into what you just said, is, we need a paradigm shift. And you've kind of shifted your work to leaders. And so in this kind of, like, if we're not picking the right work, so like, what should we be working on in education? And like, why have you shifted your work towards leaders and not, the things we can't control? Like, how did it kind of come to the work you're doing right now? Because it seems like it's at a really pivotal point in where your career is taking you.
Yeah.
And in the education, in the system.
Yeah,
I'm going to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because people look to leaders. When you think about how we just operate in life, there's always a leader in a relationship, whether that's parenting, right? Whether that's your romantic relationship, there's always a leader. There's something, a North Star that people look to, and leaders are seen as the North Star. And so to build capacity, I have to build up the leader's capacity so that they in turn can lead from a place of fullness, wholeness, and wellness. And when I think about what did I not get in my leadership program, I looked at what did I get, where did it serve, how did it serve, and then what was missing that I think would have been great to level up my leadership. And that's the approach that I take when I'm sitting with leaders. And I just focus on the evidence-based practices, the research studies that are in abundance, where I talked about the collective efficacy, right? Like that's how, as a leader, you have to inspire change in your people. You have to inspire them. Like everybody's not going to just be excited to get up and come to work. When we look at the state of the world right now, a lot of people are depressed. The unhappiness epidemic is real. Like I do studies on this, workshops on this, coaching around this all the time. People are so miserable. More than 60, it was about almost 70% of people across the globe are dissatisfied and disengaged and downright miserable at work. Right. And so again, going back to the things that we can control, right? I can control the variables in this environment as a leader. I can't stop things from happening, but I can create the enabling conditions that make you feel like you belong, that make you feel valuable when you're here. No, I can't stop the laws that are changing. I can't stop inflation. Right? Those are things I don't have control over, but where do I have control? And people spend their time complaining, right? Where we can spend our time brainstorming healthy solutions that move us forward. And you can still lead through adversity and choose joy and choose purpose and choose possibilities. That's why it's called pioneering possibilities, because every space I step into, I'm working with leaders on how do we pioneer possibilities? What is it that your team needs to feel seen and heard and valued? And then one of the other questions I ask them is, do you know what every single team member values? 100% of the time, I'm told no. So how are we creating these spaces of joy, which most companies are not, clearly based on the studies, if we don't even know what people value? If we don't know what makes them feel whole, seen, and complete when they show up to work, right? Like and I mean, this is universal. Every human wants to feel loved, wants to feel seen, wants to feel heard, wants to be valued, respected. It doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how you vote. Those are fundamental human connections that people want in the world. And so as leaders, I can't stop what happened in your relationship and what's going on at home. But when you show up here, this could be a place where it's fun. You're excited to show up to work.
I so appreciate the choose. We are so on par because I love the messaging here. I've seen it. You can get yourself into rabbit holes of doubt and trying to pull change things that you have zero control. If anybody out there in education who's listening to this, you walk into the lunchroom of the teachers, and sometimes you're going to hear that. Maybe not sometimes. It might be a lot of times, right? So you're spot on, Dr. K. I really like that. And I really like the it's culture. You're building a culture in the school. And it really is, if we don't understand who are our educators, how are they going to start to learn to understand who our children are, our students? And I really like that move. And I think that's something, this whole series is just kind of bring everybody up to speed is we've been talking about, like, what are your skill sets? What are you good at? What can we draw from you, especially in secondary education? And then how do we help you attach that value to the world, right? And it's right along these lines of understanding people, right? And who they are. People don't come to school to just be bad, be angry, they don't, right?
Yep, correct.
So
thank you for saying that.
oh, you're
Like,
welcome.
really
I mean,
think
this
it
I've
went
done
home?
a lot of different training on this, but still, even I think our backgrounds, like, we are like somewhere in the cosmos connected on this.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you then, so as we'll talk, specifically principles, right? We'll go
Yeah.
back into the system here, and maybe what are three replacement practices that, hey, any principal can do maybe or launch in 30 days that can reduce maybe removals, like maybe think about like adult moves, supports, community partners. That's what Allie and I have been talking about. Tell what are maybe some three replacement practices that are spot right there that you're like, hey, this is Dr. K would do this.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too, right, especially when you talk about the secondary level, and then I'll pivot back on over, is giving children voice. In the study I told you that came out this year on the disengaged teen, 67% of 10th graders said they do not get to develop their own ideas at school.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so if I'm coming to a place where everything is dictated to me, then you blame me for being disengaged. Then you say, I don't care. Right? Well, I don't have to do anything. You're doing it all for me. You're thinking for me. You're telling me what to do. So I'll just sit back and, enjoy whatever it is I'm getting here. And with leaders, and especially, in your PLCs, your team meetings, and the questions that I have folks ask or that I have them start with is you always start with the things that are tangible, always, right? Like Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for lunch. Okay. And so what are the things that are going to shape your culture? One is obviously mindsets, right? Like mindsets and undercurrents is like a huge thing that I do with leaders and even with teams. And they always say at the end, like, oh my gosh, Dr. K, this was amazing. And then they start calling themselves out. They go, yeah, that was me, right? And because I do it in a way that makes people safe to say, I do have that mindset. And oh, I didn't realize how the negative impact it had on kids, right? And I say, great. I'm not here to spank your hand or shame you. We've all done it. I've done it too when I was first, second, even fifth year, right, teacher. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so if that's the culture here, we just keep doing it, thinking like, well, why aren't the kids changing? Or maybe if the parents did something, we start thinking I'm just the teacher, right? And so the things that I have them do is, number one is don't assume a parent is not doing something at home. That's the first thing, because immediately when we see an undesirable behavior, we say, oh, they must have saw it from the parents. I'm like, kids have phones. They have access to the world. You think everything that they see is only what they see from their parents? Because your behavior is perfect? Right? And so let's stop assuming that if we see a certain behavior, it's because parents are not involved or that they're not disciplining at home. That's not true, right? And so we start with that, like, let's start suspending those beliefs. Another thing we talk about is language. When we start thinking about how do we start flipping the script and dismantling the pipeline, the language we use, and the language comes from the mindsets that we have. The mindsets come from the undercurrents. You see, so that's a whole journey that I take them on to start unpacking that. And when they get to the root, folks will hold on because they start getting emotional about it because they realize a lot of things they learn that are toxic, that are hateful, came from the people they love their most, their parents, their grandparents, right? And it's like, oh, I didn't realize grandma was wrong all these years, right? Or like, these things are hateful, what's been spewed at the dinner table in my home. And so I tell them, let's start with what everybody can see, language. And then I give them a list of things, statements that are said a lot in education, like SPED students, right? Those students, immigrant students, right? L's, like what are the languages that we use? What's the language we use a lot in education? And then we start unpacking, well, where did that come from? What's the message behind that?
Yeah.
Right. And so I get them to start look, especially around our students with disabilities, is they're not SPED like that drives me bananas. They are not SPED students, right? They are students with special needs. That is so, like, and I'm like, do you want somebody referring to your child as the SPED child, right? Like, It's
Right.
and people hear this and either they don't challenge each other, or they're so immersed in it that they don't even realize there's something wrong with it,
Mhm.
right? Because we have to put an acronym to everything.
Yeah.
And so I have them start there. Why? Because it's non-threatening and it's something that's universal, that, it's like, okay, well, everybody's been using it and saying it, so I don't feel so bad because it's not like somebody's singling me out individually. And so people get in it. They get all in it and they love it. And then I have them replace those words, right? Because anytime you dismantle something or you get rid of something, you have to fill its place, right? Or it'll get filled with something else. So then I have them recreate, well, what can we say instead? And then they start from there and they have a new foundation of how we start to speak about kids. And then we go into using protocols of how do we hold each other accountable, because that's the next piece that gets weird. They're like, well, what happens when my colleague says it? Right. And it's like, I'm not their boss, so I don't want to be that person. And I said, well, these are part of our team agreements. So you have to create those team agreements that when somebody says it, then, this is the response. And everybody has to come up with like, what's going to be the response. So that way it doesn't feel like you're the person, that's doing that, interrupting and feeling like you're correcting everyone.
It's a big culture shift. It's a
Yeah,
big
right.
culture shift.
It's a huge culture shift.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, everywhere that I've been, people are on board because we all have used these words at some point. All right. And when we go through the list, then they're like, oh, there's like 10 different phrases on this list. Yep. All right. Even if they're like, I've never said that one, then the one will cut. They were like, oh, okay, I did say that one. Right. And then they realize like, oh, wow. And they go, I didn't realize like that. And I was like, I didn't know either when I was
Right.
saying it. Right.
Right.
And then you could see the shoulders come down, because I have people say, you've used these words. I'm like, yes. What do you think I'm here? Like, that's what I talk about. Like, we're brought into the system to perpetuate this. And so you hear your colleagues speaking that way, you naturally start speaking that way.
Yeah.
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 And it's part of that. It's part of that whole pipeline, everything that you've kind of worked towards. One of the things that really caught our eye in your work is your the way you word is like deconstructing systemic barriers and cultivating environments that hold efficacy and foster like well-being of students and creating school spaces that you feel joyful in.
Yes.
We came off of a summer series where we talked to young people, recent graduates from college or early 20-somethings, and a lot of them said that they struggled to find spaces that felt aligned with their values and like where they were going. And part of that is certainly rooted in like they just didn't feel like exposed to certain career types so they could make like adequate choices at the time. But I think the heart of what they were also saying is they didn't maybe necessarily feel joy or happiness in school, right? Like they didn't have a voice in the work that you're kind of talking about. So what would you say, like, how can we, work towards creating spaces that are deconstructing these systemic barriers and creating really rich environments for our students?
Yeah. Give them voice. Like, and I say that like, and I'm not being facetious when I say like, this is not difficult. It's not difficult to deconstruct systemic barriers. We have so much more control than we realize. And you can't operate to be a leader, you cannot be fearful. You cannot operate in fear. As a leader, you have to take a stand somewhere. And irrespective of all of these mandates that come down on us, what can you do? When I go into spaces and I hear, I can't, we can't, I kid you not, I was in a school up until I was working with a school last year. And I remember the principal asked me to observe the teacher team when they met in the afternoon. And she's like, just listen to how they have conversation. And I was listening, and then I just heard one teacher in particular, literally, as they were going through everything, she says, my kids can't. Like I kid you, she said, my kids can't so many times, I started tallying. And I was like, I was just supposed to observe, but I couldn't help but to interject. And I said, may I ask, like, what can your kids do? And I just sat there with it. I let the room get silent and I just let them sit there. And she looked at me, she said, oh. She said, that's a good question. And she says, they can do things. I said, I know they can. I don't have to know them to know that.
Mhm.
And so, but you're showing up with a deficit mindset about them already. And so and I say to people like this is why I work with schools on mindsets and undercurrents, because I'm not coming here to look at your curriculum. That's not, you're the expertise on curriculum.
Yep.
Your curriculum doesn't matter if people feel silenced. So I'm not looking at your curriculum, right? Like, how do people feel when they show up here? Because your feeling is what's going to drive everything, right? I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Elephant and the Rider. And in that book, he talks about the power of the elephant being your emotions and the rider being your conscious, right? Like your consciousness. And think about, can you move an elephant, right? Like that's tied to your emotion. And in there, essentially, he's making the connection of like, that's how powerful emotions are. Right. And why we have to look at, oftentimes I meet leaders, they don't want to get touchy feely. They don't want to focus on the emotions. I said, well, that's what's driving everything, right? Because it doesn't matter what I show up here and say. If you feel, Peter and Ali, if you feel like you cannot trust me, it doesn't matter what I said. Because you're feeling, right? How many times you've been somewhere and it just sounds good, the person looks good, right? They got all these credentials, and you turn back to your friends, you're like, oh, something about them, I'm not feeling them, right? Like, and you're gonna go with that feeling, right? Like,
Yes.
So you can't, as leaders, you can't ignore those feelings. As a leader, how do you, going back to what I always say, how are you creating the enabling conditions for people to experience success over and over again? That is what makes people effective, right? When you could experience success repeatedly in the same area, you are then effective. Everybody wants to be effective, right? And so that now, and then when there's some type of acknowledgement, recognition, camaraderie around that, that then creates joy. But people, right? And so we get so caught up in like, we got to meet these metrics. Our kids got to pass state tests. And I do understand that, yes. But those other things need to happen and can happen in order for kids to achieve on state tests, right? And I've worked in schools where literally they'll talk about the kids is this, the kids are that, they don't care, the parents aren't involved. I kid you not. I've worked in K-8 schools and they'll say that. And I'm saying, wait, so you got the same kids from downstairs. You're in the same building and you got the same kids. And downstairs is successful and upstairs is not. Or upstairs is successful and downstairs. It's the same kids and the same family. So which one is it? Right?
But it's the parents.
Right? But yeah, it's the parents and the kids. I've seen that. And it's like, but you have to take accountability. And that's the piece that I talk to leaders about, is the accountability of self before others is one of the most powerful things we can do.
Yeah. I got to write that down. Sorry.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah.
I have a whole page of notes down here. If it,
No worries.
No, man, I guess it's just easier for some. I don't know why, but I love my kids can, and especially like as an internship coordinator and somebody who's able to learn from students, understand what their dreams, their hopes are, and then try to connect them or to the community and give them mentors and people that I don't know everything that they want to do. So you just start connecting. It's so amazing. And thank you. That's why I get so hyped up about this, because it's not that hard. It's a mindset. Once you get to that mindset, you're so on. And I know Allie and I will do a kind of recap podcast after this one. And I'll go into that, but I want to ask you, like the metrics, we got to hit all these metrics. Let me ask you kind of a different question here. as we start to, to give people some idea of how they can connect and everything, but like, what outcome metric would you publish to families every month to prove that we are starting to dismantle this pipeline? Like, what is that? What is that? How does that target say, hey, you know what, we're serious? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, that, I mean, depends. So it would be more individual based, meaning like a organization, right?
Yeah, right.
A specific organization versus if an entire community, right? Because we might have a couple of partners who maybe it's a pilot somewhere. But one of the things we look at is what are, obviously, with research, you always have your control group and your treatment group. And then essentially that is what's happening. We had one client we worked with where they wanted mentoring for, they said they're most at risk. That's another phrasing that I'm dismantling. I'm like, they're
Thank
not
you.
at risk, they're at promise. Right? Because think of, you're saying they're at risk, you're automatically treating them like they're on fire for everything. And I'm like, no,
Ain't nobody going to insure them.
right,
They're at
right.
risk.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Nobody's going to insure them.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, did you connect with their hearts? Do you even know what they like? Like, you don't even know what they like.
Yes.
You're assuming at this age, because kids are playing Roblox, that they all like Roblox, right? And like, but I may not like that, but you don't even know that about me. You just assume that about me because I live in this zip code, or I have one parent, right? Like all these things that come with that. And, in that study, they asked for mentoring. So this was really interesting. Let me tell you what happened. So they said, can you come and mentor, you and your team come and mentor these boys. We're going to pull the most at-risk boys. And I was like, well, where are your leaders? That was one of the questions I had, because I don't go anywhere without engaging your leaders. I do not work with any organization. I do not work with any teams unless I'm working with your leaders. Because when you tell me to come and work with everybody but you, what you're already communicating is they're the problem. And I said, this is why you have the results that you have, because you're already making them feel like they're the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, okay, we'll come and we'll bring mentors, but I also need to be sitting with your leadership team. And I need to be sitting with your leadership team. They agreed. So I had the leaders in one room. We had the boys in another room with male mentors. And when they came in, you had to see their faces. They were like, who are all these men in the room? You could tell they didn't know them. And then the session starts. And by lunchtime, it was a full day session. By lunchtime, you saw the boys in the cafe. They were like, so mister, when you come to my hood, you're going to play basketball with me, right? And then they just met these men like 3 hours ago, right? And they were just so excited to connect. And I said to the leaders, like, look at this. Like, this is possible. Within 3 hours, these strangers were able to know what they valued, what they like, how to connect, give them feedback. And then, months later, we did a follow-up. And the person who was running the program at the time, he said the parents reached out of those young boys and was like, my kid is like completely different in a good way. He's like invested in school. He's like doing, and this was from that one session.
Yep.
Right? And like they giving them strategies of like, you're a boy going into a man. This is what it feels like, that journeyhood, right? I couldn't connect with them on that level of the journeyhood of going from a boy to a man, right? And so, but having somebody see them and let them know the value of their education was powerful. And then the parents were like, well, is there any resources you could give me so I can continue this? The parents were now involved because they saw value in your role.
Yeah.
And not that they don't value educators, but now they see, wow, my child is responding different. So I tell people, like, what are we focused on? Are you focused on the right work?
Right work.
Yeah. Right. Allie, what do you think?
Yeah. I was just having this vision as you were telling that last story about, right, like it was a 3-hour morning session. And it's so easy to overcomplicate progress and change. And like I love that that paints a picture that it's accessible to anybody that wants to dive into that type of work. That, we're not talking years here, we're talking hours. Right? We're not even talking weeks, months. Like, you know, it can start with like a committed team and people doing the type of work that you're doing. That's so encouraging because sometimes in education it can feel like change is impossible or it's for like the next generation. It can be easy to let go of. And so it's encouraging to hear that really when you get to know someone, you connect with people, you can make a difference in a day.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
Mhm.
Like to receive that was just, it was emotional, right? Because the way they even describe them to get this set up. And I said to myself, you know what, I'll move forward because I can give them hope.
Hmm.
The educators, I can give them hope and show them a different way.
Mhm.
And it did give them hope, like, wow, now can we do this with our girls? Is what they asked. And I'm like, you can do whatever you want. That's the whole point of me doing this. And when I'm in spaces, I tell them, like, build your leaders from within, grow your own,
Mhm.
let people pick what it is that they want to lead here. Let them. Like, I'm working with a preschool now where that's been our focus all of last year, is building their leaders within. And now this year to see it unfold and come to fruition, the leadership team is so excited about that happening, where they're building their own leaders within. And they said, just ask people. And so I came in last year and I did a PD with the staff. I said, look, I'll come in the morning. I'll do a couple of hours with your staff just to get you rolling so you could see how it's done. And when I tell you the level of excitement at 8 a.m., because when I come in, we're having fun. Like, there is no parts of me is boring, right? Like, and I tell people, so when people tell me, oh, my staff is tough, I get that all the time. My staff, and people are laughing like 10 minutes in with me. And I'm like, I don't care about any of that. I don't want to hear who's failing, who you have on an improvement plan. I don't want to hear any of that. I'm gonna come in and make these people feel amazing about themselves. And
Mhm.
so, and to show them like this is possible, and to show you that you can lead this way. And then they're like, my staff asked you to come back. Like, I had one principal say, they never asked for anyone to come back. Okay. And I was like, yeah, right. And because I showed them what's possible. You
Mhm.
can make this time that you're here the best 7 hours of your life while you're in this building, right? And you can do it collectively. And that's what we did. Like, I showed them how to build collective efficacy. It's a struggle for a lot of leaders, right? I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
so what if you have all these different ideas? That's the beauty of diverse thinking. And so we put all of that together, and people started choosing. Like, one team, they said, I really want to work on our bathroom. Like that, that's all they wanted to be. And I said, let them.
Yeah.
And then I went back a couple months later, and they all just started picking different things. And I went back a couple months later, and let me tell you, the leadership team was like, Dr. K, we got to take you around the school now. We got to show you what they
Yeah.
worked on. And to see that they continued it after I left, because I made it practical,
Mhm.
and it became
Yes.
all hands on deck. And
Yeah.
people chose what they wanted. It wasn't given to them.
Mhm.
Right. So if you have those elements plus consistency of follow-up, you can create joyful workplaces.
Yes. So before we get into, how maybe some people maybe can host a screening or kind of do an action workshop, I got to ask you to finish this sentence. And I really like this. I did a little research and I was like, okay, how can I like put like a little clip-worthy closer here?
Okay.
A school that feels like a prison looks like blank. A school that looks like a community looks like blank.
A school that feels like a prison
Looks
says
like,
looks oh, ooh, looks like children walking in a straight line, hands behind their back, no talking, silent lunches. That's
yeah.
yeah,
Let's go
right.
to that school that looks like a
Yeah.
community. What does that look like?
A school that looks like a community looks joyful. Adults are laughing. Children are laughing, smiling. People are high-fiving each other. There's humor. People admit mistakes publicly and can laugh at themselves and learn from it.
Love that. Love that. That's clip-worthy. Thank you.
That's
That
you.
is awesome. So, like, if an educator wants to, or leaders want to host a screening, do an action workshop, what's the best pathway to do that?
Yes. So they can visit. We have two different sites, right? So if somebody wants to host a screening, go to preschool2prisondocumentary.com. Spell that all out in one word, no letters. I mean, no numbers in there. And then if people want a workshop, if you want a screening workshop, or if you want just a workshop, because I do have people that skip the screening and just want workshops, you would go to pioneeringpossibilities.com.
Got it.
Yes.
Wonderful. Can't thank you enough for sharing your stories. I have a feeling that Ellie and I may think about, okay, how this might be a whole series, because it's so, that collective efficacy is such a game changer. I gotta tell you, it is. I'm 23, going into my 24th year of education. People are like, how do you do it? You explain that. And we just had an amazing class that anybody and everybody can kind of, this tip of the iceberg. I would highly suggest people reach out to you, Dr. K. But thank you so much for spending your time with us today on the Disrupt Education podcast.
Absolutely. You both are amazing, first of all. And I love that you're doing this. The title alone just drew me in right away. And I was like, what? Disrupt? I am Disrupt. And so I appreciate you for having me on and continuing this conversation, because we need people who are not fearful to lead, who are not fearful to have honest conversation, and who are not fearful to disrupt and rebuild, because we can't just disrupt, but we also have to rebuild. And so shout out to you all. And I tell people that comes in any form. You have to find what your purpose is. And I just love that you are living out your gift and doing this and your purpose. And thank you for that. And I'll continue to follow your work and
appreciate
keep you updated as well. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all again for listening. This was the Disrupt Education Podcast for Ellie Dahl. I'm Peter Hostrasser. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the Disrupt Education Podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, we'd appreciate it if you subscribed and shared it with someone on their own learning journey. We're also excited to announce our new career coaching services, where you can work directly with Peter and Allie to clarify your path and showcase your unique value. Visit disrupteducationpodcast.com to learn more. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep disrupting education.